Some inherit riches, others inherit burdens. But what would you do if you inherited a house filled with terrifying secrets? Tonight's story takes us into a dark mansion where every jar holds a scream, and one of them is still alive. Welcome to The Collector of Screams. And now, let's begin. The mansion stood like a monument to dread. Elise tightened her scarf against the biting wind as she stared up at its grim facade. Built of weathered stone and crowned with turrets, it seemed less like a home and more like a relic of something terrible, a relic she had, for better or worse, inherited. Her uncle Silas had died 3 weeks ago, the circumstances of his death shrouded in secrecy. The lawyer's curt explanation hadn't satisfied her curiosity. "Heart failure," he'd said, sliding the key to the mansion across the table. But Elise's childhood memories of her eccentric uncle, a man with a taste for the macabre and a laugh that hinted at secrets, told her there was more to the story. Now she stood in the frost-bitten yard, gripping her suitcase. The iron gate behind her groaned shut, trapping her in the chilling embrace of her inheritance. Inside, the mansion was just as she remembered, dimly lit with a lingering smell of wood polish and decay. Dust motes floated like specters in the pale sunlight that streamed through narrow windows. Heavy curtains, embroidered with unsettling twisting patterns, hung like shrouds. Elise was here to sort through Silas's belongings, the lawyer had insisted, sell what she could, move on. But as she wandered through the echoing halls, something in the air, an unshakable sense of being watched, made her hesitate. Her footsteps led her to the library, a cavernous room filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves. Elise ran her fingers along the spines of books whose titles were printed in languages she couldn't read. At the center of the room was a desk cluttered with papers, and perched atop it was a strange object, a glass jar about the size of a cantaloupe, sealed with a metal lid. Curious, Elise picked it up. A faint vibration buzzed in her palm, as if the jar were alive. She tilted it, and her breath caught. Inside, swirling like mist trapped in a storm, was a faint glow of red and gold. Then, faintly, she heard it, a scream. Not a loud, piercing wail, but an echo, as if heard from a great distance. Elise set the jar down, her pulse racing. What had Silas been doing in this house? She opened a drawer in the desk and found more jars, each neatly labeled with a date. July 4th, 1998, October 13th, 2005, January 23rd, 2012. The handwriting was meticulous, and each jar contained a similar swirling mist, though their hues varied. Some jars were cold to the touch, others radiated a faint warmth. She wasn't sure how long she stood there, transfixed, before she decided to take one of the jars upstairs with her. Maybe if she studied it more closely, she could figure out what it was, or what her uncle had been collecting. The night brought no comfort. Elise's room, sparsely furnished, felt oppressive under the weight of silence. She placed the jar on the nightstand and lay staring at it, the glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. Just as she began to drift into an uneasy sleep, a sound jolted her awake. It was a faint, almost imperceptible hiss, like a tea kettle starting to boil. She turned her head and froze. The jar's glow had intensified, and the mist inside spun faster, pressing against the glass as if trying to escape. And then she heard it clearly, a scream, raw and desperate, emanating from the jar. Elise scrambled to her feet, knocking over a lamp in her haste. The jar's lid began to tremble, tiny cracks spider-webbing across the glass. "No, no, no," she whispered, backing away. The jar shattered with a deafening crack, sending shards flying across the room. The mist spilled out, coiling and expanding like smoke. For a moment, Elise thought she saw a shape within it, a contorted face frozen in agony. But before she could react, the mist dissolved into the air, leaving behind only silence. The next morning, Elise returned to the library, determined to uncover the truth. She combed through Silas's papers, eventually finding a leather-bound journal hidden behind a row of books. The entries were sporadic, some written in hurried scrawls, others with a calm precision that chilled her. June 3rd, 1987, first successful capture. The scream was perfect, the energy palpable. If only she could hear it now. October 11th, 1993. They must never escape. Containment is key. Without the lid, they will take form, and that cannot happen. August 2nd, 2007. One escaped. It took me hours to dispel it. The price was regrettable. The final entry, dated 2 days before Silas's death, was cryptic. The warm one stirs. It knows. I fear it may soon awaken. God help me if I cannot contain it. A chill ran down Elise's spine. She flipped the pages, her mind racing. The jars were not just decorative oddities, they were prisons, each one holding the essence of a scream, the echoes of terror somehow extracted and contained. But why? And how? Her thoughts were interrupted by a low creak. Elise turned toward the sound and froze. In the doorway stood a figure, a tall man in a dark coat, his face obscured by shadows. "You shouldn't have touched them," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Elise's heart hammered in her chest. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man stepped into the room, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes that glinted with malice. "A collector, like Silas," he said, reaching into his coat. "But unlike him, I prefer my specimens fresh." Elise's mind raced as she stared at the man in the doorway. His presence filled the room with an oppressive weight, and his words, "I prefer my specimens fresh," hung in the air like a dark omen. She backed away, her hand brushing against the desk. "Stay where you are," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll call the police." The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Go ahead," he said, "but they won't find me, just like they never found him." He gestured to the leather-bound journal lying open on the desk. Silas thought he could keep this quiet, keep it safe, but he was playing with forces he didn't understand. "What are you talking about?" Elise asked, her hand trembling as she gripped the edge of the desk. "The screams," the man said, his eyes glinting. "They're not just sound, they're life force. Pure, unfiltered fear, ripped from the souls of the dying." Silas discovered how to capture them, but he never knew their true power. Elise glanced at the journal, its cryptic entries suddenly taking on a sinister new weight. "And you do?" she asked, stalling for time. The man smiled, a cold, unsettling twist of his lips. "I've spent years studying his work, perfecting it. That jar you broke?" He stepped closer, his boots echoing ominously on the wooden floor. It wasn't just a scream. It was a fragment of a soul, trapped in torment. And now, it's free. Elise's pulse quickened. "If you're such an expert, why didn't you stop it?" she shot back, trying to mask her fear with defiance. The man's expression darkened. "Because I wasn't expecting a meddling niece to come along and ruin everything," he snapped. He took another step forward, and Elise instinctively grabbed the nearest jar from the desk, holding it up like a weapon. "Stay back," she warned. The man froze, his gaze locking onto the jar. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Put that down before you make things worse." Elise tightened her grip, her heart pounding. "Tell me what you want or I'll—" Before she could finish, the jar in her hand began to vibrate. The mist inside churned violently, its glow intensifying. Elise gasped and nearly dropped it as a faint scream echoed from within. The man's eyes widened in alarm. "Don't open it," he barked, lunging toward her. Instinctively, Elise threw the jar. It shattered against the wall, and the mist inside erupted into the air, swirling and coalescing into a shadowy form. The room grew colder, the temperature plummeting as the shape solidified into something monstrous, a figure with elongated limbs and a face twisted in perpetual anguish. The man stumbled back, his bravado evaporating. "You fool," he hissed. "Do you know what you've done?" The creature let out a bone-chilling wail, the sound reverberating through the mansion. Elise clapped her hands over her ears, but the scream seemed to penetrate her very skull, filling her mind with a cacophony of despair. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial filled with a shimmering blue liquid. "Stay behind me," he shouted, uncorking the vial and throwing its contents at the creature. The liquid hissed as it made contact, and the creature shrieked, recoiling as smoke rose from its shadowy form. "What is that?" Elise demanded, her voice barely audible over the noise. "A binding agent," the man said through gritted teeth. "It weakens them, but it won't hold for long." The creature lunged, its elongated arms stretching toward them. The man grabbed Elise's arm and yanked her toward the door. "Run," he commanded. The chase through the mansion was a blur of terror. Elise followed the man down twisting corridors and staircases, the creature's wails echoing behind them. The mansion seemed alive, the walls groaning and shifting as if reacting to the unleashed force. They burst into the basement, a cavernous space filled with shelves lined with jars, each glowing faintly in the darkness. Elise's breath caught as she realized just how vast Silas's collection truly was. Hundreds, no, thousands of screams, each one trapped and waiting. The man slammed the door shut behind them and turned to Elise. "We need to contain it," he said, his tone urgent. "Do you know where Silas kept his binding tools?" Elise shook her head, panic threatening to overwhelm her. "I don't even know what binding tools are." The man muttered a curse under his breath and began rummaging through the shelves, pulling down jars and inspecting their labels. "There should be a failsafe," he said. "Silas wouldn't have left this collection unprotected." As he searched, Elise's eyes were drawn to a large, ornate jar on the far side of the room. Unlike the others, its glass was black, and its lid was sealed with intricate silver filigree. A faint, rhythmic pulse emanated from it, like the beating of a heart. "What about that one?" she asked, pointing to it. The man froze, his face draining of color. "Don't touch that," he said sharply. "That's the master scream, the first one Silas ever captured. It's volatile." Elise frowned. "Volatile how?" "Think of it as the source," the man said, his voice grim. "Every scream in this room is connected to it. If it breaks—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Before they could say more, the door shuddered, and a deafening crash signaled the creature's arrival. It burst into the room, its shadowy form now flickering with bursts of red and gold light. The man grabbed another jar from the shelf and hurled it at the creature. The jar shattered, and the released mist collided with the creature, momentarily destabilizing it. "We can't keep this up," the man said, panting. "If we don't act fast, it'll consume everything, including us." Desperation overtook Elise. She turned back to the master scream, its pulsing rhythm seemingly beckoning her. "What if we use this?" she asked, her hand hovering over the jar. The man's eyes widened. "Are you insane? That's not a weapon, it's a Pandora's box." "Do you have a better idea?" Elise shot back. The creature roared, its form expanding as it absorbed the loose mist in the air. Elise made her decision. Ignoring the man's protests, she grabbed the master scream and heaved it toward the creature. The jar shattered, and for a moment, everything went still. Then the room erupted in chaos. "Got it. I'll rewrite part 3 with simpler language and keep it more straightforward. Let's aim for clear, vivid descriptions and an easy-to-follow tone. Here's the revised version." The moment the black jar shattered, the loudest scream Elise had ever heard filled the room. It wasn't just a scream. It was hundreds of screams all mixed together, a terrible, painful sound that made her drop to her knees and cover her ears. It felt like the air itself was breaking apart. The shadowy monster froze, its body shaking and breaking as the mist from the jar wrapped around it. The swirling mist glowed brighter and brighter, turning into shapes, faces, human faces. They twisted and screamed, their mouths opened wide in terror. Then, the creature started to change. Its dark, foggy body grew solid, and it turned into something that looked almost like a person. Its skin was pale and thin, like wax, and its face kept changing. One second it was a man, the next a woman, then a child. The faces switched quickly, too fast for Elise to make sense of them. The collector, the man who had dragged Elise into all of this, stared at the creature, his face pale. "No," he whispered, stepping back. "This isn't supposed to happen. This can't be." The creature turned its strange, shifting face toward them. When it spoke, its voice wasn't just one voice, it was many, all speaking at the same time. You freed me. Elise slowly got to her feet, her legs shaking. What are you? She asked. The creature tilted its head, its many faces blinking and twisting. We are the screams, the ones trapped, the ones silenced. We are everything your uncle stole. Elise's heart sank. She looked at the collector, who was reaching for something in his coat. Is that true? She demanded. Did my uncle really? Of course, it's true, the creature interrupted. He trapped us. He used our pain to make himself stronger. And this one, it pointed a long, bony finger at the collector. He wanted to do the same. The collector pulled a small vial from his pocket. Don't listen to it, he shouted. It's lying. It's dangerous. But before he could do anything, the creature raised one hand. The collector flew backward, hitting the wall hard and falling to the floor. He groaned, but he didn't get back up. Stop, Elise cried. Please, no more. There's been enough hurt. The creature turned its many faces toward her. Do you really want to help? It asked. Yes, Elise said, her voice trembling. Tell me what to do. The creature gestured at the shelves of jars that lined the room. Break them, it said. Free the others. Let the screams go. Elise didn't waste any time. She grabbed a jar from the nearest shelf and smashed it on the floor. The glass shattered, and the mist inside spilled out, swirling up toward the ceiling. It was gone in seconds, disappearing into the air. One by one, Elise broke the jars. Each time, she heard the faint sound of a scream as the mist escaped. The air in the room grew lighter with every jar she smashed, like a heavy weight was being lifted. The creature watched her, its face slowly growing calmer. The voices in its body began to quiet. The screaming stopped, and the faces stopped shifting. By the time Elise reached the last jar, the creature looked almost peaceful. She held the final jar in her hands. What happens when I break this one? She asked. You set me free, the creature said softly, and I disappeared too. Elise hesitated, her fingers tightening around the jar. Will it hurt you? No, the creature said. It will finally let me rest. Elise nodded, tears stinging her eyes. With one last swing, she smashed the jar. The mist swirled up, and the creature closed its eyes. Its body shimmered, then faded away, leaving only silence. The next morning, the house was quiet. Elise walked through the empty rooms, the shelves now bare. The jars were gone, and so were the screams. The house felt lighter, like it had finally let go of something terrible. She packed her bag and left the mansion behind, stepping out into the cold morning air. The wind blew gently through the trees, carrying the faint sound of whispers. For a moment, Elise thought she heard a soft, distant scream. Then it was gone, swept away by the breeze. Elise tightened her scarf and kept walking. She didn't look back. Not all echoes fade, and not all secrets should be uncovered. Elise freed the trapped souls, but some jars remained warm. What would you do if one ended up in your hands? Thank you for joining us for tonight's chilling tale. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.